Welcome, everybody, to Studio Visit with Raven, episode number 11. I have a great guest today that I'm super excited to welcome to the podcast. A guest that, when I was conceiving this podcast, you were on the short list of guests I wanted to have on. I think I reached out to you, when I was kind of thinking of doing this podcast. And we finally made it happen, but it's Rafaël Rozendaal. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, for all, that people that don't know you, you are a very, experienced, artist, visual artist, digital artist, has done work, well before NFTs, even sold websites, that, could be seen as like a precursor to NFTs, so you've been doing this selling digital work for a while now. Yeah. And, you're exhibited in, you've done exhibitions, too many to name around the world, and, in the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum and other museums, and just a fantastic person too, just like someone who I've been able to, meet and, go to a coffee with in New York anytime I'm there, and just another artist who I really respect. So, Rafaël, thanks for joining.
Yeah, this should be fun. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start out with just, I want to start out with like your background, right? Like, where did you grow up? Like, when did you start to like think about producing art? That kind of stuff.
It's really from day one, because my dad's a painter and my mom was trained as an architect. She was working as an architect, but my dad was an art teacher and a painter, and my mom worked, but not as a. I just grew up in a very artistic household, basically. So if you imagine, our house kind of looked like a gallery.
Yeah.
Like an old house that's fixed up and white walls and wooden floor and no furniture. And just materials all around, paint and wood and all kinds of tools for drawing, architectural tools for drawing, painter tools. So I basically grew up in a workshop or in an art school.
Yeah.
If you have to visualize it. So there wasn't a decision like, oh, when am I going to experiment with art? And of course, every child begins with drawing, even before you think it and before you even remember that. Like, you might be drawing at age 2 or 3 and you might not remember that when you're older. But I remember just going to museums and seeing paintings and then going home and making my version of that painting or thinking about that, and then learning about perspective, and then going home and drawing a robot, but with perspective. Like, oh, the arms and the nose of the robot are going towards a vanishing point. So, like, literally going on vacation in Italy and seeing Renaissance paintings, and then making drawings at home of a robot inspired by that vanishing point. So I always say my work is a little bit like the TV was here with cartoons, and my dad was painting abstract paintings over there, and I'm somewhere between moving images and abstract paintings.
That's so funny, and it sounds like your home had like you said, it had you had access to these like different materials like all around that you could just pick up.
My friends were artists too, and a couple of family members too. So it was just very normal, and it was even for me, like, I don't want to be a fine artist. I'm going to draw comics and take pictures of bands and more subcultural stuff.
Yeah. Were you interested in comics as a kid?
Yeah. I was a big fan of Robert Crumb, and then a lot of Dutch comics. So maybe as a teenager, I was sort of moving away from fine art and thinking that that's all very pretentious, and I prefer the culture around music and zines and comics and all that kind of thing. But one of the things I think is very different in the US and in the Netherlands is in Europe, there are more art institutions in smaller towns. So it's very easy to have that around you. And I think in the US, if you grow up in a small town, that feels very remote. So that's something that I think just to give you the background, like that, it's something that's more part of everyday life. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at the history, and the Dutch master painters are, it's some of the best painters ever have come out of the Netherlands. So,
I mean, that's also a little bit the idea of admiring art from the Greek or the Romans. It's always when they're at their peak of their economic power. So there's a bias there that the Netherlands had a lot of economic power in the 17th century, so we admire their artists of that time. So
that's really interesting, and that's something that you bring that up at I've talked about that earlier on this podcast for sure with some of the other artists of that. Art is just one part. When we talk about like the art market, and it's a fascinating question that I always think about, is that what makes art popular, what makes certain trends that people point to and say, oh, this is great art, and
it's mysterious, right?
Yes.
Because no one really knows. And like the music you like, someone else doesn't like, another way around. And does that you might like a really obscure album, and somebody else might like what's in the top 40, and is one better than the other?
Yeah, exactly. It's like how do you even make a determination of quality in that sense? Because it's like there's just so many factors into it, and especially when we talk about kind of you could call them the most the in the art world, we're talking about painters, the painters, the Rembrandts of the world, these quote unquote masters. I can't help to think like their work is great also, but what's curious to me too is like what you brought up of like the environment around that time produces them, but also it's like it almost elevates certain art right over other art.
And it might elevate art that fits the agenda of those who are elevating.
Yes.
So that there might have been all kinds of folk art that is lost that was maybe incredible. And if the aristocracy wasn't interested in that, then it's gone, or some might be left. And
it's super interesting, and it just makes you really think like on a philosophical level about quality and what is good art, how do we even conceptualize that question, right?
And then so early on I started on the internet also with the idea that in a museum you might like the art, you might not like the art, but everyone agrees what you're looking at is art. But on the internet, you're like, is this a meme? Is this art? Is this a tech demo? And it's very open to interpretation. And I found that very interesting, that the audience has to make their own judgment, make their own call. That's a very different environment.
Do you have like do you have any like definition for art? Like, or what would you say like in that sense? Like, what is art? What's not art?
So far is the art is the collision of a personality and a material. And a material you can see in the broadest sense: language, code, marble. It can be anything, but it's the collision of a personality and a surface or a material. That's what I see as art. But there's no that definition does not have anything like of greatness or hierarchy or anything like that.
Yeah, but you're saying you need an observer to have art. Is you're saying
it's also like if you give that person a sketchbook, that comes out. If you give that person a guitar, that comes out, and it's the personality and the material that tension between the two. It's like, I have all these ideas, I want to express them in a song.
Yeah.
But a song is a different thing than an idea, and I think that tension is interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That's awesome. No, and it's really cool that we've gotten meta this early in the conversation. I feel like when we talk and we have these conversations, I was hoping we would go here.
One of the things I found interesting, like coming into when NFT and when I met you, I came from a group of people that we had been doing digital art and art in a browser since the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
and it wasn't easy to monetize. We had different ways. The way I thought of it was the domain name. So what I would do is create a code-based moving image and put that in a domain name. And so the idea was you just arrive at a website and it says, I'm very, very sorry.com. It's easy to remember. You go there, you see a moving image, and that's it.
Yeah. I'll bring up some of those right now, actually, because we should.
And so when blockchain arrived, it was very funny. Funny.
That's my VPN. It's not you. Yeah. I may do that a couple times. It's all good.
But what was interesting, all my friends were like looking at NFT and like, this is what we were doing, but more streamlined. That it's really, we were hesitant because we're like, we built this ecosystem of domain names, which is a more human thing that you can remember instead of a contract address. So I hesitated for a long time when it was actually a friend of mine who started NFTs, Kevin McCoy, in 2014. So I was aware of it, but I was a bit hesitant.
Yeah. And so was any other artists like doing this back then, like selling websites like this, or were you kind of one of the only ones doing it?
So first of all, when I started 1996, I started browsing. I saw a lot of online experiments. So people from many disciplines would make. Do you remember superbad.com?
It sounds right. Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And this was kind of the net art period, right? Which is kind of referred to that, right? Yeah, that's like what the movement is referred to.
It wasn't just art. It was like fashion agencies or design agencies or architecture or sound designers. They would all put experiments online. Yeah. No one saw them as permanent. So a lot of that stuff just disappeared. They didn't think of keeping it. They were just like, oh, this is a fun thing. And then a year later it's gone and it's fine. And I think the net artists were like, no, we should archive this. This should stay in the place, and so you can always find it.
Yeah. And it's really cool. And like, so you, and you thought of this, but you were kind of like, beyond that, they were putting up kind of like, I think putting up websites is one thing, but then going on to sell those websites as art, that's something different. When did that start? Like that artists start doing that?
Well, I had discussions with different net artists and everybody says they're the first. So Jody said they're the first and different people said they're the first. I haven't found conclusive evidence. There was a website called hell.com. Yeah. And it was a group of net artists that had this domain all together, but that was a group and it was more a platform. And so they would do temporary exhibitions. People would show things for 2 weeks and something else. And then they sold that domain name, not as an artwork, but just in the domain business. Yeah. So that's too bad because it's a cool domain name.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's a thrill of finding a domain name that's available. And but I still think the cool thing about net art is that there's no interface that indicates a price at all or selling. So you see the work and you don't think about the price. Yeah. That's something that's, software always has trade-offs. And so once you introduce the sales mechanism and the price right next to the viewing experience, that's the trade-off. Yeah.
And with NFTs, you have a historical price, that's you can't erase that you see every sale that there is, unless it was a private sale, but still that definitely changes things. Right?
And that is that colors the viewing experience. It's not neutral. That makes you look at things differently. Yeah. Do you think that you don't? You're saying that affects kind of the way you perceive the piece. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, and the back to like, why is Rembrandt a genius and the 10,000 other painters that you might not know their name? He's the most expensive. His works, and that might be the same in 100 years when you look back at NFT. But for us right now, we know many different interesting artists, and then maybe But I do think one of the cool things about ownership is it makes people care more and not feel the content doesn't feel disposable. Yeah. You own it. You're like, I'm part of this. I want to be involved. I want this to last. And
Yeah. So you were part of this movement, you know, that you started selling things on websites. How did you list the websites? Like, how did you find collectors that would purchase a website? Like, did that go?
So I would say the first 10 years I was on my own, and sometimes people would just email me.
Yeah.
They had heard about it, so sold a couple through email. And then there was one publisher friend, and he came over to my studio with a collector, and he bought 7 works at once. And I was like, wow. And that was crazy. So it was through word of mouth and talking to people and doing group shows. But there was no gallery involved. That came later.
Yeah. And were you making physical work at this time too? Like it was like, you were just doing digital work like that. Yeah.
I think I started making, so I made physical work in art school and of all kinds. And then around 2007, I started doing drawings, but they didn't really stick. Something was missing. It was just black and white drawings with a brush, kind of going back to the comic book thing. They were basically, I would take found internet images, you know, that folder that everybody has with silly images, and I would trace those with a pen and sort of give them permanence. But I hadn't found it yet. And then I moved to New York, and someone invited me for a group show, and they said, we have a sponsor to do a lenticular invite, like a postcard.
Yeah.
And since I work with moving images, they're like, do you want to try creating a moving image for this lenticular? And so I created a couple of options, like a very figurative animation, and then I had a very abstract, more blurry one, and that turned out to be very interesting because it used the shortcomings of the medium. So lenticular prints are very blurry. They're not really good at smooth animation, but I embraced that blurriness. And so I made this little postcard, and then I was excited, so I made a little video on Instagram. Hey, look cool. And a collector who owned one of my websites was like, oh, that's so cool. We should produce it and make it large. And so he basically funded the first one and then bought the first one, and that made it possible to make it very large. And then I started going from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really
cool. It was a funny Instagram collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when did you, so you started doing that, and then I guess
it was 2012.
Yeah,
2013. So and I hesitated because I was like, I'm an internet purist. Should I make objects? And I wasn't sure. Yeah.
So you were more like, you were hesitant to do that. That's interesting.
Because it was idealistic to make websites because I felt like everyone can experience the work, and it's not like you're looking at a photo of a work, you're looking at the actual work. And that was important to me, that the viewing experience for everyone around the world is equal. That it's not, there's something cool in a rich person's home and I can't experience it.
Yeah, and that's something that's just so cool about this whole, which is continue with NFTs, is like, and just that aspect of it is that everyone around the world can easily see the work, and experience it. Granted, that also brings up problems sometimes because, everyone's experience is going to be different. I mean, like, they're going to experience it, but like they may not have the same color graded monitor or someone's doing it on a projector. They're not seeing it the same resolution. So it brings a lot of problems in that sense.
I thought about that from the start. And so I always made work. My work looks the way it looks because of what you're describing. I wanted to make work that even if it's an old computer and the monitor is only 256 colors and it's only 640/480, it should run fine.
Wow.
So all my work I use bright saturated colors because they survive any monitor.
Yeah.
If you use very subtle colors, then on some older monitors, you might lose the detail, and a light gray next to a slightly lighter gray might look the same.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make work that the idea was it should work on any size of screen, from an outdoor billboard the size of a building to a smartwatch. It should always be like this, very like the image you just pulled up or any of the others.
Yeah.
You could imagine them the size of a postage stamp or a building, and they'd be fine.
Yeah. For sure. And, I think it's So it's like almost the minimalism that, you know, people would kind of describe your work of it comes from, you're saying that it came from, you know, a desire for it to be kind of compatible and people to experience, exactly. You know, be able to experience kind of the same thing.
I think every moment that technology has a shift to a new platform, there's always a reduced visual style. So when you think of early animation, the early Mickey Mouse, the animation was very cumbersome. You had to draw everything. So Mickey Mouse only has 4 fingers. It's just quicker to draw 4 fingers than 5 when you have to draw so many frames. And Mickey Mouse is 2 circles, the body, and then 2 circles for the ears. It's just quicker to draw it that way. And so early video games is kind of a primitive language, early animation, early woodblock printing. And I call this abstraction out of necessity, not abstraction out of luxury. So you have this reduced toolkit, and out of that comes a creative solution. And, you know, I think that early video games look very expressive, and like maybe modern video games are more photorealistic, but I have a tendency to like those early moments in technology.
Yeah, it's interesting how, well, you know, it's goes back to the kind of question too that, you know, Sarah Ridgely and I were having about, you know, skeuomorphic, you know, art and things like that, right? You know, and on the digital side, you know, I think, you know, there's artists like myself included, like a lot of my work is, you know, kind of emulating different techniques, right? Or physical work or things like that. And then I think there's this other, like, I think yourself is more in the category of kind of breaking from that and kind of, you know, embracing the digital medium and trying to make it its own medium, you know, in that way.
Yeah. And back then, if you wanted to do anything interactive in the browser, that was the only option. The computer couldn't run anything else. And so I just stuck with that ethos. And all the websites you see, the code is usually under 50 kilobytes, probably less. And that turned out to be very practical in the age of the blockchain.
Yeah.
So the ethos that you build up, and and every time there's a new technology, there's a new bottleneck, like a new funnel.
Yeah. It's just so funny how, like, you know, we talk about it, but it's like, you know, how so much of what you were doing in this artwork, you know, how much it did translate over to NFTs and the Art Blocks platform and this type of stuff. You know,
but then I think every time there's a new technology, it starts low res and then it becomes TV. So the internet itself had its own aesthetic with GeoCities and animated GIFs, and then morphed more into a CNN 24-hour newsfeed. Yeah.
That one. This is cool. Oh, it has audio too.
Yeah.
People should check these out.
Yeah.
Wow. I can feed in the audio too for people to experience, but this is.
I'm curious if for the NFT community, if the history of net art is kind of obscure and difficult to comprehend, and
it's really interesting. I think people, you know, collectors that have, you know, kind of looked back at kind of the origins of generative art and, you know, kind of the stuff that's been the generative art that's been in Web3. I think they're familiar with net art, but I think that's probably a small percentage, to be honest, of the collectors. I think that's why I love having you on to talk about it, because I think it is a movement that people that, you know, collect digital art or are interested in digital art should definitely learn more about, because it was a key movement. And it's just so interesting that, which, you know, talking to, you know, Lovid, like, on this is like how, you know, the history of digital art, like, in what you were saying is so wild that it just, you know, there's been so much history, but, you know, it's only been very recently that it's been possible to be like, you know, a very successful artist, be a digital artist, you know what I mean? Like it's
market. Also, it's a medium that is difficult to document, in the sense that you can buy a book of the history of paintings.
Yeah.
And you're not seeing the actual paintings, but you're getting the trajectory of all the painters. And
Yes.
you can understand from Greeks and Renaissance and modernism, you can follow it in a book. But to follow, for example, the history of CD-ROMs in a book, it's very difficult. You don't understand the interactivity, the sound, the movement. And so I don't know how if that will survive, because it's so hard to understand or so hard to research.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's the question, is like what will happen? I think, like, like with digital art and things like that. But I think you gotta think the blockchain has that permanence, that it will be around, and it makes that almost easier in a way, because as long as the blockchain, it's accessible to everybody, right? Like, that code is going to be still there. Those works of art, if they're, hopefully even if they're on IPFS, IPFS is designed to, be permanent, and you hope that it has more of a shot to do that in the future. And like, that's something I did want to ask you as well, is like, when we talk about digital art, and now, the last couple of years has definitely just been like, and you've expressed like, it changed a lot of things, right? Like, when you get to this, like, did you see this coming at all? Like, did you see?
No, not at all. No, I had no idea, because and I was with the same gallery as Kevin McCoy. He was at the event, and together with, I think, Anil Dash, they came up with the concept of an NFT, of tying an image to the blockchain and authenticating it. And he had a startup, Monograph, and I remember seeing him, and I was like, this is so hard to use. Remembering this hash and this seed phrase, and it's all scary. I'm like, it's just too nerdy. It's too it requires too much expertise. And it turned out to be a big thing. I still to this day, I'm not sure if sovereign ownership and Ethereum those concepts can ever be usable for regular people, or that it will always be a niche thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're still, it's still way too complicated, and it's not, the people that own NFTs or even able to collect NFTs is so small compared to the the general population. I think we have so much further to go with the usability of it. And I think, like, most people are not gonna, have their own keys and store their own seed phrase, and I think, like, that's not realistic to expect of people, or desirable, right? You need custodians to.
This idea of the seed phrase frightening, but it's
like, it's just but I think I'm optimistic that over time, I think it will become easier and easier. The tech will be extracted away, and we won't even talk about NFTs anymore, right? It will just be digital assets or something like that, right?
Does it mean that you're using Coinbase wallet and they have all the tech and you just have a login, but then it's pretty centralized?
Yeah, I personally think it's going to have to be centralized. I don't see how you could, at least partially, because I think in order to make it user friendly, like, you need custodians, like, and they serve a key purpose, right? It's the same reason I think about it, like, why so many people use like mutual funds and things like that, right? They invest that way. They don't just pick their own stocks, they're not for their 401k. They're not like, there's people that will do that, there's people that have the education and the desire to do that. But I think for the majority of people, that's something they would rather centralize and give control over to a trusted party, right? To manage, right?
Yeah. And one of the things I thought when I started with making art for the screen for the internet, I thought this is where we are living our life and where we are learning to see.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, their relationship with color and movement comes maybe from video games or from Tumblr or from Instagram or from TikTok. that's where you're learning, where you're developing, and you could either address that experience in a classic format like painting or sculpture and make art about that visual culture, or you can focus your energy as an artist in that environment itself. So you can make art inside a video game, or you can make a video game as an artwork. And I guess both options are legitimate. Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think about, like, because still, like, you know, digital art, even after the last couple of years, you know, is still, it still feels like a niche, you know, like in the art world, in the broader art world. It doesn't feel
but I always felt like if the mainstream doesn't like it, then you're onto something.
Yeah.
So I think it's a compliment in a way. Like if the world is not ready for it, that means you're on the cutting edge of something.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just, do you think that it is, like, what factors do you think hold digital art back? Do you think it's just the usability of it? Do you think it's that people just are so used to, over centuries, you know, like associating art with physical media like painting and sculpture, and it just digital?
I stopped even evaluating whether it's a category that's successful or not, because I think the classic art world, like, let's say the art world in New York from 1940 until 1970, when you went from abstract expressionism, pop art, minimalism, you had like 5 galleries, 20 collectors, and they decided everything. It's very simple art world. It's like, you're in, you're out, da. Right now, visual culture and high art and low art, there used to be lines, and then the lines became blurry, and now it's just one big cloud of creativity from all sides. And each side says, like, no, we know what's cool, you don't. But it's such a mess that I don't even think about it anymore. All I think about all day is just making my next work.
Yeah.
And then opportunities arise in different worlds, but all you can do is make your work. And then whether the world is ready or not is up to them. So you can really break your head thinking about it. But
well, it's something I've really admired about you, I think, is and when I've talked to you, you know, when I, you know, was releasing my projects and being kind of a, you know, an artist that's starting kind of my art career, and I reached out and we chatted, and I think you just always have a very good, like, a good sense of this point of not getting caught up in the market, not letting it infiltrate your practice.
Yeah, well, it's the weird thing that, to me, the more you ignore it, the better your chances are.
Yeah.
And it's hard to explain, and it's hard. I think for a lot of people, art is overwhelming. Like, how do you even start? It might be just as difficult as becoming making a living out of being a DJ. Like, how do you start with it? I don't know. Or you made some tracks and you threw them on SoundCloud, and now what?
Yeah.
But what I've seen from friends, so, you know, I started in art school and I graduated in 2002. So I've seen many people going through different stages of their career, and also a lot of people who are very focused on success and not the work itself.
Yeah.
And it looked to me like the people who focus on the work itself have more success than the people who are focused on success.
Yeah. Which is paradoxical.
Yeah. But that might not be true. I don't know. But this is, I mean, you know, from NFT world, like, some people are very good at growth hacking, or like social media strategies, very savvy.
Well, it's also a time frame, right? Like, you can, like, I think with a lot of those strategies could potentially, you know, you could elevate your work in the market temporarily, but at the cost of, you know, alienating people maybe long term, or something like that, right?
I think I came up, like, start doing some group shows and being invited by other artists, and I was like, I'll have a solo show at the Guggenheim in 2 years. Like, like, okay, for sure. That didn't happen, and after that, I'm just like, let's just see what happens. Like, what I mean is, I just, it just seems logical to me. Same if you're an athlete, if you're focusing on the game itself and training and getting better, and not focusing on why did that person get that sponsor deal and I didn't, and now I'm feeling depressed, and now my performance is not as good when I'm hitting a baseball. I don't know.
How do you seems? Yeah, I think one area like that you continue. I think your cadence of putting out work does not change no matter the market or anything like that.
No.
I think you put out work no matter what.
Well, I make work knowing, like when I started out, I'm from the Netherlands, so the cost of living is a lot lower, and there's all kinds of. I had a feeling I would just live in a tiny apartment all my life, keep my cost of living very low.
Yeah.
Ride a bicycle, cheap healthcare, whatever. And in my head, I was like, if I have $500 a month, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
That was my goal. And I've surpassed that, so I'm not scared of anything.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like when I hear people like, oh, I have mental health issues because of blockchain, because of my drop. And then I think your forefathers were like, had a job in the mines or in the trenches, and you're scared of putting some JPEGs on the blockchain. It's not a big deal. Like,
yeah.
Okay. So I compared a lot to stand up, and I think you just have to do a lot of jokes and see how the audience reacts.
Have you ever done stand up? Have you done that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
I was wondering.
Fan.
I was like, Rafael does some stand up. Cool. I want to go check that
funny,
out.
But there is something to stand up where you try material in front of an audience, and it's not up to you whether that material is good or bad, but you.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel with
you don't know,
work.
right? That's the thing. You don't know until you put it out there, right? Like that's comedians, they test material, right? And they will purposely go to like maybe smaller shows or something like that to kind of test the material before they bring it to like a bigger audience, you know?
And for blockchain, that might be like FX hash might be where you test things.
Yeah.
And then you build a bigger algorithm and it goes to a bigger stage, and you might find out that those sort of low stakes environments are better for creativity, and you're happier there. And
yeah. And the thing is too, like what you said before, I think is of how the art world is changing. I think that's really true. And I think like, you know, in the NFT,
it's expanding. Like the audience of art is so huge.
Exactly. And I think the NFT space is kind of like, I hear people, you know, saying, okay, trad art versus like crypto art and stuff like that. And like, I don't think that dichotomy really exists the way like people talk about it, right? There's so many different movements and so many different subgenres of art, right? And different collectors that like certain things, and it's not necessarily just two camps, right?
Well, when NFT came along, like a lot of traditional art people were very suspicious because it's uncontrolled, and like imagine you don't know anything about NFTs and you just go to the OpenSea homepage.
Yeah,
that's tough. Like,
well, it's like also like you don't know what to buy because there's so much stuff that's out there, and like no one is advising you on what's a good art and what's bad art. You know,
but
it's kind of like
the same when you install Instagram for the first time and someone's like, find some good art. It's like, where do we even begin?
Yeah.
But then it turns out that the traditional art world now runs on Instagram. It's very vital to everyone's like, if there was an opening, you can immediately see documentation, and so these tools are so broad that you can't really say that it's a movement or an aesthetic. It's a platform. So it's there's more people that have a say now, is what you're saying, than it used to be very tightly gated, and you know, people were, like you were saying, certain gallerists were basically just pointing to an artist and saying this is a good, and they would make an artist, you know, that way. And that's evolving less and less, is what you're saying, is that there's more opportunity for different artists to break through. Yeah, but I think maybe for the last 200 years, the art history seemed very linear. You had this decision, then photography came in, then that changed painting. And maybe insight is more clear, but it looks now like people who do data visualization or motion graphics or special effects are very close to digital fine artists, there's not a clear boundary there.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting. Like, I just think I personally am just so excited of digital work because I just feel like, and I've said it before, of what's more contemporary than in contemporary art than digital art. Like, it's how much more, we spend so much more and more time in digital platforms, right?
There is a funny counter movement now that a lot of people also have a reaction of the digital seems to become too negative. The feed is so much doom scrolling and negativity that people are like, I need a break.
And they want to escape in art. They want to escape digital.
So art serves a different purpose for different people. And some people might think like, all I want to do is go online and see new drops and see this exciting activity in Discord. And some people are like, I want to go to a gallery and just look at ceramics and no notifications.
Yeah.
No Twitter, no Instagram,
no
nothing.
Pixels. Like I use a screen to look at my work all day. I don't want to use a screen to look at art, right? Like that kind of thought process about it.
Yeah, totally. And everything in between. So yeah,
that's really interesting. And I guess that brings up the point of displaying digital art, because that's something that I know have, you have, created different groups, right? Do you want to talk about like Bring Your Own Projector? Like, what was that?
Yeah.
What was that group that when did you start that? And can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So it's called BYOB, like Bring Your Own Booze type of party.
Yeah.
But, in Germany and the Netherlands, we say beamer for projector.
Oh, okay.
A beam of light. So Bring Your Own Beamer event. And I just had this idea. Like, I remember curating new media shows is very complicated because you need a budget to find all the gear.
Yeah.
And I thought all my friends own projectors because they're video artists or they're making moving images. If everybody just brings their own gear, then setting up a show costs zero. And so,
how did we get to so many, like, I feel like in the NFT crypto art space, it's like projectors were never thought of. It just went straight to screens on walls. Like, how did that happen?
That's a different story. Yeah. But I at the time, a lot of people own projectors even to watch movies at home. And my friend had a big studio. So together we curated the show in Berlin, I think 2010. And the funny thing is, all the shows that I'd been a part of so far, they were always very tense. There was a lot of pressure. And this just felt very relaxed. Everybody brought the projector and the stakes were very low. It's a one-night exhibition. So it's more like an event. And it's very flexible. You move back, the image becomes bigger. You zoom in and out. And you're like, hey, that work this relates to that work. I'm going to move my projector that way. So it became this organic thing of moving images all over the place. And immediately people said, oh, we should do this in Greece. We should do this in New York. We should do this in Paris. And I made a website with the instructions, and it's an open format. So anyone who wants to create a BYOB exhibition is free to do that. And I stopped counting. While I was counting, this was maybe 8 years ago, I stopped. It was at 450 events. So there must be over 1,000 now all around the world.
I think that would be like I don't know if has anyone done that with like in the NFT space, like hosted one of those, because I feel like
I don't think so.
It would be something that would just be really fun and great to do, like
fun
sharing
is the
some
right
of this
word.
art. Yeah.
And so the instruction for BYOB is find a space, invite many artists, and ask them to bring the projector. That's all. Yeah,
that's great.
It's very easy. Yeah.
And then you just set up and just display your work there.
Yeah.
Just really. Yeah. And would you invite the general public and things like that in? Is that kind of what the idea would be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's fun is that if you invite 30 artists, they all invite 15 friends, and then immediately have good energy.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's on that note, about community, like, it seemed like that's one thing I really do like about the whole, crypto art NFT scene, is that, I think it really has brought together, it has, community is something that's really strength, right?
Yeah.
Is, we got Discord, we got different platforms that have their own communities coming around this. How did you, before this, how did you communicate with other artists, before this?
Email?
Yeah, you just had email threads?
It's very funny because it was, I remember people would have a homepage with their work. And let's say you've made 7 works and you have thumbnails of the works, but usually you would have a bio page with a photo because there was no social media.
Yeah.
And that in crypto is the opposite, where you keep your real face hidden. And so that was funny, but it would just be an email saying like, hey, I saw your website. I really like your work. And then often it would be people in different cities, but then if I was visiting Paris or Berlin, I would know someone there and be like, let's have a coffee. And
that's great. I want to jump into your NFT work a little bit, and just the stuff that you've done more recently. It's your work is some of I just really enjoy it. I mean, it started. Was your first NFT work your art box release, Endless Nameless, or did you have things before that?
I started on Foundation. Yeah. And so those were video pieces, but if you view them on my website, it's the code work. So what you're seeing now is randomized and code based.
Yeah.
And on Foundation, it would be an MP4.
Yes.
Can you go back to the thumbnails?
Yep.
Or maybe just browse through a few of them. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting because Foundation was a different limitation than I was used to. I was used to code based, and making these loops, it was an interesting different take where it felt more like my decision instead of randomizing.
And you I know that you have, so your style is very geometric, strong colors, mm-hmm. I would say it, has a minimalism to it, of where it's not trying to be anything pretentious. Like you went back, and I thought it was very interesting, at the start of, this podcast, that you were talking about, even at a young age, that you were kind of, you didn't want to go towards that fine art, and you felt that, you felt an aversion to the pretentiousness of kind of that culture at some point. And I think even now that kind of, I see that in your work, because, your work isn't pretentious, right? It's it's the opposite of that in a lot of ways. It's simple but powerful.
What I find interesting is that I think a lot of artists, everyone is trying to prove their intelligence. Yeah. And I try not to do that. So I try to say, I follow my curiosity, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm putting it out there. And I'm not trying to say in art school, when you present your work, often people over talk. Yeah. They're like, this work does this and this and this, and it's going to solve all these problems, and and I'm more let the work speak, and it's coming from a subconscious place. So it's a place beyond words. And I'm not going to say that this work represents A, B, C, and D. The work is. That's
interesting. Yeah. So so you almost don't have really stories or narratives behind your work.
No, but I think my work comes from painting, and I think painting is a place of focused seeing and just staring, and a place. It's very difficult to explain because it is a place that's beyond words. The same way we don't expect the story behind a melody. A melody is a melody. And I think you can see the same way you can listen to music, you can also look at colors and composition.
It's so interesting we're having this conversation because, I agree with you, and I'm on your perspective on this, that I think you can have narratives, and definitely I have works that I've said narratives, but there is, a level that's beyond that narrative, right? That you can't make a narrative about, that is subconscious. At the subconscious level. But it was interesting that I had, MV on the podcast, and he was saying, we had this similar conversation. He was like, no, what I like to do is if I don't know what's why something isn't causing a feeling, I have to find it out. Like, and he's like, I need to dig in. And when I get that feeling of I don't understand why I like this, I get really curious, and I get obsessed with finding out exactly why that is, so I can emulate it in code, right?
Yeah,
I think that's just interesting.
I remember being a kid, being a fan of animation, and there would be festivals of old animation and festivals of experimental animation. I remember reading this book that in the golden age of Hollywood cartoons, like early Disney and Betty Boop and all these things, you know, like each artist has a handwriting and a certain gesture that you recognize. And for animators, that's in the walk of the character. So even without any dialogue, you can see, oh, that animator has a more bouncy walk, and that one has a more grounded walk, and that one just and so I was dreaming of creating these cartoon characters, but without a story. I just wasn't interested in story, but just their personality in the movement. And that became more abstract. But I'm just very interested in these, you know, you can talk about food. If you imagine a piece of fruit, like the best piece of fruit or a different piece of fruit, if you've never had an orange before, any orange will taste good. But if you've had a really good one, then the other oranges, you become more critical, you become more, you have an expertise and you experience nuances that other people might not.
Yeah.
Same with wine, same with classical music, same with electronic music, and yeah.
Do you feel like on that front, you know, like, you know, you ask for feedback sometimes, like when you're an artist, and sometimes, you know, I've asked and I just like something, right? But you don't know why you like it. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of ask for feedback or something, and someone may, you know, that's pretty, you know, has been to art school or something like that, will give you kind of, oh, you should do this and that because of these rules, right? That this is, you know, and I end up like not following that most of the time.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I just think like, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like there is I value intuition more than theory or anything like that. Like, you like something because you like it, and you don't necessarily have to explain it, you know, like.
But that's interesting also in the context of the internet, because what's that social network for artists that is kind of like a
artsy? No, that's not a social network.
No.
That's like
it's like digital drawings, and it's more folk art, but digitally.
I don't think I know.
On the net. No, cool. I think you know it. It's like
maybe.
It's like the number 8 social network in the world. It's pretty. It's almost where illustrators would share material and get.
Oh, like DeviantArt? No, not. Is that
DeviantArt.
it? Yeah, DeviantArt. Okay.
And I think that's kind of the opposite of art school. It's more like, this feels good, I love it, like those kind of words.
Yeah.
And art school is like critical theory, and you're thinking and changing the world. And so I think the area in between is interesting. I don't think it's a dichotomy of like, I'm in dreamy, happy place, everything I do is genius, or I'm in hypercritical space, nothing's good enough. And somewhere there's a process of judgment always, like even and so I wish I had a simple answer.
I don't think I really asked a question. I was just kind of like getting your thoughts on it. I think you got it right. Like, you know, for you, I don't think there is a right answer with this type of stuff. You know, but it's more process than anything.
What I found is that you create a body of work, you make projects over the years, and then when it's time to do an exhibition or a book or a new project, sometimes an older work that you thought was unimportant is just the right fit for that context. And so that's the thing where I feel like I don't know what is good or bad. I just follow my curiosity. And later on, it might be like, this is the perfect fit for this place, and this is the perfect fit for that place. So,
I think it's also too, like personally, I just like to make art for making art, and I just want to, like, I'd rather make art that I really like, even if it's other people don't like it, than do the other way around, where I'm making art that I don't like that people like. That, you know, it seems inauthentic and not fun at all.
But it's interesting that I listened to some of the episodes of this podcast and about the invention of the printing press and democratizing things. Everything has a trade-off. And so when music became recorded and the radio, and you can listen to every possible genius at any time, it also means that people become intimidated to play music at home. So
whoops,
your camera's.
Let me see. That's all good.
My grandparents.
I got a new camera for this, but I can switch it too. I'll probably switch my camera.
What I was trying to say is, like, maybe before the radio and the record player, people would have to play music at home to listen to music.
Yeah.
And so, and the same with art making, like, it might be intimidating having access to all of art history. Maybe in a way, for some people who didn't have that, that was liberating, because they're like, oh, I don't have to compete with Rembrandt and who knows what.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's interesting the way you say it. Like, it's just like I'm just really surprised with how many different philosophies when I talk. Like, it's great to talk to different artists, because there really is, like, different artists think of things completely differently, and that's like it's kind of awesome. It's like there's not necessarily a right answer.
I think a lot of artists keep their research hidden and then wait for the exhibition to show a finished work.
Yeah.
And I think on the internet, people tend to share more of process and unfinished works. And so that's a very different attitude.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think it's, I think it's just really cool. And I think, like, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, like, I definitely know that one of your, like, Joseph Albers is one of your big inspirations, right? And you have done work, Homage, which I own one of your work, which is a great. I probably can bring it up, which I really enjoy. What is, like, about his work that you really enjoy, or that?
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, if you there it is,
here it is,
we talked about the browser as a space for art.
Yeah.
The browser doesn't have a fixed size. So I would make work that kind of functions as a silhouette mural, that you can stretch it out to any aspect ratio and it will adapt.
Yeah.
And then when NFT came along, the square became very important. A lot of NFTs in the beginning were square, and because that works on any device, whether you're watching this way or that way. And I know that Joseph Albers had a fascination with the square.
Yeah.
And I had made a website, homage to the .com, which was the early version of this, but it was in a unfixed size. And then the square came along. All that being said, I was very interested in Joseph Albers. He doesn't judge colors. He made maybe 1,000 of these paintings in different color combinations, and he would get paint from different manufacturers around the world. So he's not making a choice which color is more beautiful than the other. It's more just letting it happen and seeing what colors do with each other. And I wanted to do the same, but with the added dimension of movement.
And he also had, like, a, I had his book on kind of color theory and, like,
the interaction of color.
Yeah, it's a great book. And it's all about that, like, how color, like, is really, our perception of it is based on the interaction of it with other colors.
Yeah. And so in this work, the color on the outside of the animation and the color of the inside, as the square moves inside, it fades into the other color. And so I was just interested in a way, animation fading from one color to another is a gradient, but a gradient based in time. So a gradient on the screen, if you imagine it, is a gradient based in two-dimensional space.
Yeah.
But this is a gradient based in 1 millisecond later, the color is a little bit more like the other color.
And then it slowly just kind of disappears, like, into the center area, which is really cool.
What was interesting, that I was in a group show. I had my first solo museum show in Germany, and the Joseph Albers Museum was 20 minutes from there. So they knew that I was doing that. And then I showed the work, I exhibited there. And then I heard a lot of personal stories because they all know all these stories about Albert. So what I didn't know is that he started painting when he was 50.
No way. Really?
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
He went to art school and he was teaching at the Bauhaus.
Yeah.
But he was doing stained glass and more applied arts and art theory. And then going to the US and talking about art and teaching students about art. And at some point he decided to paint himself.
Oh, wow.
So he had some training in painting, but he didn't present it as art until he was 50. And so that felt very liberating to me. Like,
yeah, for sure.
And the other the quote that he has, so he always paints with a palette knife instead of a brush. So it's basically a dull knife. And he would take a tube of paint and just spread it on the knife and apply the paint. And he says, I paint like someone butters their toast.
Yeah, I have a palette knife, so I should try that.
But the whole idea was like, he's not bringing any change to the material. He's just applying the material. And so the paint is very pure.
It's like almost like a combination of, it's interesting because it kind of parallels his color theory as well. You know, like he's not changing. He's not really. It's interesting just because I see that relationship between different colors, and then he's also bringing a relationship between different the paint. And he would travel
around the world collecting tubes of paint, bringing them back to his studio, and then every work on the back he noted which pigments he used, which paint brand.
Yeah.
And a paint from South America is different than a paint from Europe, is different than a paint from Canada. And
that's really interesting. And so like you definitely, your work is very colorful. Like that seems like, were you always that like interested in color in the way that you are now? Or was that something
it's funny. My first year in art school, we had a painting class. We had to start with oil, and that a lot of teachers want to loosen you up. So that instead of painting with a brush, we would paint with a roller on a big piece of paper. So everyone's making these messy compositions. That was the point.
Yeah.
Like, let go of your inhibitions and just feel free.
Yeah.
Abstract. And so we're hanging all the works on the wall and we're critiquing like, oh, something interesting is happening here, something. And he kept coming up to me. He's like, you're great at color, but you suck at composition. And then it stuck with me. And then in all my interactive work or the websites, I would control the color, but I would let the script decide on the composition. So that was often the thing where that's something that stuck with me because I was like, I'm pretty confident deciding on colors, but I'm not so sure why this yellow circle should be over here or should it be over there? I don't know. So I would just let it randomly go around.
Yeah. That's really interesting that it's like, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But I feel like you have good composition though now. I feel like a lot of your work.
But it's funny how things when you're young, someone might say something to you and that hits really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. These I want to talk about these doors and cabinets.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because you did an exhibition around this, right? Like this type of work, a physical exhibition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk about that? That was pretty recently. That was like last year, right?
Yeah. If you pull up the cabinets, it might be easier to explain.
Yeah, definitely.
So
for the people that are listening to this, it's definitely, you can look at the video or check out Rafael's website, but he basically has, solid, colors that, are basically look like cabinets. They have a small dot as a handle in them. And,
I think if you scroll down, there's a change cabinet button.
Yep. Right here.
Over there. And so every time you do that, it generates a new cabinet. And if you decide to mint it, then the composition is permanent. Yes. If you don't, then it's lost forever because it never repeats itself. This whole thing, everything I do comes from drawing with a pen on paper. So in an analog paper sketchbook, I draw and I think about composition, often movement. And here I was just like, okay, if you have a rectangle and you split it in half, it's abstract. But if you add these dots, all of a sudden it's figurative. And I was interested in that tension of You just add the tiniest thing and immediately it becomes a visible, recognizable object. And it's a tiny difference between just 3 stripes and, the other thing I liked about this is this idea of modularity that is very common when you go to IKEA and you have a tool where you're assembling your perfect cabinet.
Yeah.
But you're not thinking about it as a painting. And then here, it's not a storage device. The other thing I thought was funny is that if you own an NFT and you have these 3-dimensional worlds where you view your NFT collection, all of a sudden this cabinet becomes a real cabinet because you put it against the wall and nothing's real in VR. So it might as well be a real door or a real cabinet. And then the idea of storage in a figurative sense, but also data storage and storing things and this being stored permanently on the blockchain. And then if you scroll down on this website, I think you can see visualizations of what they would look like in a museum.
Yes.
And then we did that physically in the Folkwang Museum as well. So I like this idea that you own an NFT, but in what form is up to you. So you can decide to make it into any physical form that you want. If you own the work, you can render this on your wall, or you can project it, or you can view it in the metaverse. That's up to you.
Yeah, that's really cool. It'd be cool to have a cabinet, these colors. Like if someone made a cabinet, like from, emulated, it made a real cabinet like this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember a long time ago in my kid's bedroom, we went to IKEA and I sort of assembled a very colorful, you could pick any color for the doors. So I was like, let's do red and blue. And
Yeah, this is also reminding me of another piece of yours, which is Horizons, the 81 Horizons.
Yeah.
Which I really liked because it's just another
all these
one
that you pulled up are all SVG based. So it means that back to that problem of IPFS, this is all 100% self-contained in the smart contract. So there's no PNG preview image or anything. It's when you go to OpenSea or Etherscan or wherever, the image is generated by the smart contract. There's no storage outside of the smart contract.
Yeah, it's just this project I just love because it's just so simple, but it's so like cool. Like, it's two squares, with 2 different colors, and there's no texture, no anything like that. It's just like 2 solid,
and
colors.
If you go back to my website and click on exhibitions, then if you click on that image, it'll enlarge. And then we showed them this space.
We showed all of them.
There's one of them that are each recognizable separately. I chose the number 81 after just thinking about like what colors of the sky are common, what colors of soil and grass and ocean are common. And I came up with these 81. And for me, it was important that they're distinctive enough that you could recognize which one is yours and that they all make sense in a figurative way, that you're like, oh, that's a beach.
Yeah.
That's a parking lot. That's a football field. And then it was this amazing opportunity to show that those are all 55-inch screens. So it's a very large space, which you might not be able to understand from the photo. But that was an amazing experience. And the whole space was completely dark and only lit by the screens.
Yeah, it's just so cool to that's something I really like about your work is just, the simplicity of it, but it still is really great. It really gives me, your work gives me like a lot of hope as an artist that like, because it really, I think there's just like you've talked about before there's basically, and I think in all art forms, there's this temptation to have to go to like really technical, right? The success in art is basically by accomplishing something super technical, right?
Yeah, something no one else can do.
Exactly. Whether that's in code or whether it's in painting, and or if you could think of it in music or something like that, someone that can just play a certain piece in violin, or they can compose a piece in violin that no one else can play, right? And they actually have the dexterity in their fingers and everything else to do it, right? And it's impressive, you know. I think there's a temptation for artists to kind of, I guess, you know, go in that direction of like, you know, to kind of embracing that worldview. Oh, I need to go more crazy. Like I need to do something crazier. Like,
well, it makes sense also if you're, if you imagine you're a scientist and you're going very deep in your research, at some point, no one else can follow what you're doing. Like if you're a theoretical physicist, only a few people in the world can understand what you're doing. So it's back to that, what I was saying, art is a personality, the encounter of a personality and a material. A certain personality will go into virtuosity. That's their character. Another person is more interested in pop culture and wants to reach a lot of people. Some people lean to, there really is no answer why simplicity or virtuosity is better, or both.
Yeah.
I enjoy complex music and simple music, but overall, I do think I veer towards simplicity and reduction.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's something mysterious about being a human, that your spirit has a tendency and you're not in control of that. Like you have a curiosity that leads you somewhere, and that is not up to you. Like, what's your thing? And you have to discover that with trial and error.
Yeah. I think that the thing is that when you do that level of things, you're right that the I think one of the downsides of that really technical outlook is that very few people are going to be able to appreciate that, because it's so, it is, other artists will really respect you, or other people that are, you know, in that, you know, in that trade or whatever it is, because, you know, they understand that, wow, like that is really hard to do. But like a general public, like you're saying, may not know that nuance, or it's like really far away from their understanding of it and how they experience the work, that it just doesn't hit, you know, the appreciation.
When I talked about the growing up sort of with an aversion to pretentious art, I always like this feeling of different subcultures of music and comics, and that you have the feeling that it's easy to participate, that you don't need a big budget or a lot of technical knowledge to start. And if you get that feeling out of my work, that's the best I can do. That was always the idea for me, is that, it's easy to get started. You don't have to feel intimidated.
Yeah. I think that's great. Like, and that's a great feeling. And it focuses the work, also art, I think, on its on the simplicity of that experience, you know, of how does it, you know, affect the observer. And, you know, it doesn't need to be complicated, you know, it doesn't need to awe them in its, you know, in that way, right? It can be just fun and playful and lighthearted, right? It doesn't have to be this serious, like, you know, thing, right?
But there's room for everything. It's some people really love it when a work is dark and difficult and dense and complicated, and
Yeah, I guess it's true too. It's like, just you have to kind of know what kind of artist are you, right? Like, and figure that out, is what you're saying, and and lean into that. More.
Yeah, the only challenge around art on the internet is you're dealing with a lot of distraction, and so that's a struggle for me and anyone who's creating. And back to that idea of like, will people like it or not? And then basically you have an open studio all the time. It's just the whole world is in your screen, and that's the same space you want to create. So that's pretty tough.
Yeah, for sure. And like, everything
it's a whole space where you can
quickly.
Constantly compare yourself, and I think comparing yourself is very counterproductive when you want to be creative.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's 100%. This is a piece. I think this is the one. No, do I have this one? I think I have. No, that's 0. That's yours. I have one of these, but
I saved all the zeros, so
no, this isn't yours. I have another one, but this is a piece. And when I talked to you about this one, you said, "Oh, I've had this for a while. I didn't think to release this."
Yeah, well, the website that you're viewing is my. It's based on Artblock's engine, but it's I wanted my own website where I can drop projects without worrying about anything.
Yeah, exactly. Which now Artblocks is coming out with studios, so you'll be able to do that. And I have my site I have engine contract where I release things on too, so I'm in the same boat. It's
but it's nice. Even for me, I'm doing a drop every 2-3 weeks.
Yeah,
this was one that was in a folder where I have the maybe folder, and it's like I'm not sure about these. And then people love this one, but I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, I think it's just I don't know. I love it. I think it's just it's pool. It reminds you of pool. It reminds you of like again, like it's that
and Damien Hirst at the same time, and
and it just like again, like I really think what's special about your work is how you can take something simple. Again, like these circles are just regular circles. They don't have like some texture on them or anything like that. Like it's just colors in a solid background and
a physics engine.
And a physics engine, and you're having it move around, and you immediately, because they like when you first open it, you don't realize what it is. You don't see it move, right? You just think, okay, it's just a bunch of dots on this background. Okay, cool. Like. At least that's what I thought when I opened it. And then as soon as I see it move like that, I immediately, now I'm like, oh, wait a second, this is a pool table. Like, and it brings
the
back,
tension.
Like,
I'm interested in that tension between the figurative and the abstract. Where it takes a second, and then you can't unsee it.
And then it's like, oh wow, this is really cool. Like that, and then I think about it more, and I'm just like, wow, you're like, he was really able to kind of capture a lot with very little, like, which is something that I think you do really well with, the Horizons and all these other projects, is that you're able to capture a lot with not doing much, which is like I said, like not something that is super technical or far out of reach. And I think that's actually like a strength, like, to do that. It's like someone who is super concise with, their prose or something like that, where someone may have a huge vocabulary and just like want to flex their vocabulary, right? And they're gonna say in long sentences, You
know the comedian Mitch Hedberg?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, you can look him up, but he's very concise with his jokes, and it's like, what's his joke? It's like, an escalator can never break; it just becomes stairs.
Like just like
that, so I admire that.
It just like super concise, but like hits. That's great. That's awesome. And so like you've done a lot of NFT projects. You've obviously done multiple on Artblocks. You did Endless Nameless, which was the first kind of I said.
It's funny because I come from this. I just always feel this urge to publish stuff. I've always had that.
I know that's one of the things too, is like that I have admired of you, is that you like, you put out so much work, and like, I think a lot of other artists are hesitant to, put out work because they say, oh, the market isn't going to buy this. It's, I don't want to devalue my existing collectors by putting more supply out. Like there's all these narratives that like people will tell you that is like,
but I've heard that argument a lot of times, but I think all the most famous artists have a huge output. So and diverse. When you think of Warhol or Picasso, they weren't scared to put out work. It's just like,
you're 100% right. Like,
and when you think of Warhol, he stopped painting at some point, and he's like, I'm just gonna make films now. And he made films, and then he published a band that was a producer for the Velvet Underground, and then he. Just whatever he felt like he did, and publishing books, and then Interview magazine, no limitation whatsoever.
Yeah, there was a good article by what's that guy's name? He's the Club NFT CEO. He actually is from Massachusetts. I think he's on the Artblocks curation board.
The guy with the
with the headband. What's his name? His name Jason something.
Yeah, I think so.
People will know. But he wrote an article like, this may be in 2020 or something, like before 2021, where things kind of took off, but saying this exact argument that you're talking about constraining supply is actually like, if you look at the data, it doesn't even make sense. Like,
I have to say, like, I'm not strategic, so if I feel like publishing a work, I put it out there. There are artists that are much better at the market than I am. But it makes me happy. That's the point. So I love doing it, but I'm sure if you talk to some experts, they're like, "Oh, do this and this and this, and you'll be much richer."
Yeah, I know, and that's what. But I mean, I don't think. And back to what you said in the beginning. I don't necessarily think like doing that is helpful. Like, I think what you were saying is like there's this paradoxical like kind of thing that is with all this stuff, that it's like, you can get distracted by the market and focus on it and try to optimize for it and all this, and a lot of times it ends up being the exact opposite. The people that aren't focusing on that and are just doing good work are going to be the ones that end up being the most successful, or whatever that means.
I think,
again,
for example, Beeple is a good example. It's not exactly my cup of tea, his work. It's more into the world of complexity and narrative. But he's definitely someone who creates without any fear, just every day. Yeah. That's not easy to do. And so how could you say it's bad to put out work when Beeple is the most successful crypto artist? And you can't argue with that.
Yeah, and he's putting out every single day. He's putting work out. Like,
and not only those works, he creates other works and then creates a museum. He's just having fun and just whatever he wants to do. So I respect that a lot.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's awesome.
Did you go to his space?
I haven't been yet. It's in South Carolina. I think it's probably every picture I've seen is like awesome though. And like I've met him before, at events and things like that. Mm-hmm. He's really cool and he's wild.
Yeah, but it does seem like he has a lot of fun. And I like this ethos of the crypto space where people like Team Lab or him, and I think Rafiq is also building a museum. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to wait for the institution. I'll just build my own space.
Exactly. I mean, that's the way you got to do it. I mean, I think that's what I try to even say is like the quote unquote traditional art world is actually like really small. Like, there's so much opportunity, I think, especially with like now digital and generative artwork, to bring in a whole new generation of collector that would never collect.
And even audience that can't afford to collect.
Exactly.
They're happy to participate. Yeah.
100%. And that's like, I talked with Sarah Ridgely about this like as well, like, which I've just been passionate about. I know Snowfro's passionate about it. And just like this idea of like what I think generative artwork is so powerful at is just, this aspect of economies of scale, right? Like that no other art form really can do. Like, you can't, like the reason why paintings are so expensive is because like it takes a lot of time to make them. Like for one painting, you have to physically execute it. Like with generative artwork, you can make an algorithm and you can generate potentially millions of outputs, and they're all unique. And that just is really exciting to me that it that exists in the medium. And I that's why I like almost feel like it needs to go to a more mass market. I would like to see it go there because I think it's an opportunity to unlock a whole.
I guess it's still a usability UI
for sure.
Problem.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's just like that has to be solved. But I think it just can bring a whole like this democratizing of art, like we're talking about.
Well, I was also listening to you in another podcast, and so the original premise of net art is that you make a work, anyone can view it, but there's one owner. But everyone can enjoy it. So someone owns the work, and maybe an institution or a private collector, but you make a deal that they keep it public.
Yeah.
So that already solves the audience problem. Generative art then broadens the collector base.
Yeah.
But it does dictate a certain style of work, because if you want to make a work that is interesting in 1,000 variations, it's going to lean towards geometric abstraction or pattern-based things.
Yes.
It's not going to be a soup can. I guess it could be many things, but it is a format, and it might, for some artists, it might not be a good fit. So
Yeah.
while I understand the ownership part is exciting, I think also digital art in many other forms, if your thing is more like making videos, you can't make one video in 1,000 variations. That would, so it's not for everybody. I think there's so many forms of expression. Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like,
but to finish the point, like, if someone writes a hit song, like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, everyone has the same version of that song. It's not that they would have to generate a different version of that song for every listener.
Yeah, no, I know.
Theoretically, you could do with AI, but maybe there's one golden version of that song, and that's what we should hear. That's their intention, and they're like, this is the way it should sound. Yeah.
I think, but like to me, like I think that's what generative art's like superpower is almost like is the ability to create unique outputs and to have one of ones, but at an affordable price. Like it's like, you know, like that's the thing that's crazy about it to me that, you know, no other kind of form of art can do really. Cause like, again, like, you know, you either have to do additions or you have to like, you're executing these paintings.
It's a very odd format that didn't exist before. It's hard to comprehend for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think like the world like is not built in everything manufacturing to everything is built on a addition kind of way, you know, shirts, anything like we talked about, you know, which I think is really interesting to rethink that in, you know, as you have the ability to do generative stuff and we have generative AI now and this type of stuff of viewing it, not necessarily as runs like print runs, but now you're viewing it as, customizable or, you know, just iterations, right?
Yeah. But I think, I do think there's the theory, like, the theory is it's great for everyone to own a unique work. And then there's the reality when you're drawing and you're inspired. And then part of why I made my own platform is I had a lot of ideas that were interesting in 20 variations, not in 2,000.
Yeah.
But not every idea fits 2,000 output or 10,000 output.
Or a million.
And so, and so sometimes you're like, this feels right for 16. This feels right for 24. This feels right for 250. And not everything is a 10,000 idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but I could see like, you know, like I could totally see some of your work, you know, supporting that just based on color relationships, you know, like if you had, you know, if you had certain color relationships and, you know, this one, and it would generate one of the random colors. And then basically the rest of the composition is based off of that color, right? Based off the distance around the color wheel, for example, you know, like that could really produce a lot of potentially millions of different outputs that are slightly different because, you know, there's if the color space is in the millions, you know.
And in your experience with the NFT community, the newness of these generative collections, it became a known format. At first, it was a big surprise, and so now you have to bring something new to that format.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Like I think it's like I don't know. That's a good point too. Like I feel like you know, like everything just has to continue to evolve. Like that's the way it is. At least for me. I mean, maybe other artists are just like, you know, I don't know. Like they're okay with just doing the same thing, and that's just what they do. But at least for me, I want to see, and even as a collector, I want to see something new. Like what's different or what's, I don't know, you know, like, and I think like, you know, I think like it's going to continue to evolve, right? Like we had this long form generative art, but then, you know, I think people are going to find different ways of passing in randomness or, you know, what I did with dots was just like, okay, I'm going to like, you know, have these dots and going to be able to put them into another project, which then is going to take those in and then use those and put them in a new composition. You can burn that. And it's like, that stuff is interesting to me to try to like visualize where we can go in the future of like the medium, right? And push it. And
I'm very,
that's curious to me, but
I'm very excited to see there's so many minds that now opened up to art, and very curious to see what comes out of that.
Exactly. I think like I think it would be a really cool, and the goal of this podcast and things like that is just getting the education about, you know, the history of digital art, but also like, you know, trying to bring more people in to create digital art and to really enjoy it. And
I have this story to explain how the traditional art world sometimes is old fashioned. I had a show in Spain, in Barcelona in 2005. So I made a wall painting, I had drawings on the wall, and we had a projection with an interactive work.
Yeah.
And there was a pedestal with a mouse, like the classic Apple clear mouse with one button, very easy to use. And this collector comes in, and he's maybe 60 years old. And the gallerist is like, "Oh, this is a very new type of art you should see." He's like, no, please. I'm uncomfortable around computers. No, just try it. But he grabs the mouse, but he grabs it upside down. He just never held a mouse. And that was such a barrier. And what I'm trying to say is that improved so much over time that now if you put a tablet or a trackpad or a mouse in an exhibition space, everyone knows what it is. But there was that learning curve that I think as time goes, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, I think it's just, and also too, it's like, I think which I think you've done a pretty good job of this, you know, with your exhibition and stuff like that, is like us as digital artists, we also have to think more about the presentation layer, right, of this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how does this, you know, beyond screens and things like that, which is definitely one way of the net art, which I think is like, this is another way, another area I think needs to just evolve, right?
The thing that I think is when you're at home on your laptop or your screen, you're locked in. Yeah. You don't think about your surroundings. But when you put a screen in an exhibition space, the surroundings and the screen, they should have an interesting relationship. Like the size of them relate in an interesting way. So it's like that's something to consider. Yeah.
The other thing is too is like this is very based on screens. Like the art we're creating is based on the screens and these type of things. Mm-hmm. But like, you know, with VR and these headsets and stuff like that, like, you know, there's a chance we don't have screens in 20 years. You know, and you know,
I'm not so sold on the headsets yet. But
you know, I think as those headsets get smaller and the resolution goes up, you know, it just makes so much more sense to me to have a virtual screen in front of you than a physical screen if you can accomplish the same thing, right? Like,
I'm waiting for the sort of e-ink wallpaper where it's just like kind of calm ambient wall that can move and
that has animation, and that's the kind of stuff that I'm really interested in, is that merger of maybe even traditional art forms, things like that, or just physical objects, you know, like you said, like wallpaper, like just that type of thing where it's
like the Harry Potter moving paintings in the school.
Yeah, exactly. And like even some, what I would wish for is just like, you know, more screens that have different aspect ratios, because 16 because it's so hard to get even a screen that's not 16:9, right? That isn't a regular TV size, you know, because that's what they make the you know, that's the manufacturer. Yeah.
No, I have some friends at Infinite Objects, and they do.
You're endless, nameless, like in that big that I've seen a couple times in that big Infinite Objects, like, you know, square. It looks awesome.
But they were trying to do a small square screen that would be more affordable, which I think would be really fun.
Yeah.
The supply chain, it's just you need to place a really large order for that to work.
That's why it's crazy like that's, and I've been thinking of like kind of like
doing my own trade secrets.
It's all good. I'm sure they know. But like, you know, I've been thinking of like just like how can I, you know, not use, because like I'm just really interested in that, like of how to display work, you know, outside, you know, in a collector's home, doing installations, things like that. Like, I'm very interested in that. And I've been trying to figure out, okay, can I like get, you know, can I just like string a bunch of LEDs together and make custom screen like that way somehow? And, you know, so it can be a flexible aspect ratio. Isn't just a TV.
Yeah.
there is something that bothers me just personally about TVs. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it just is.
Well, the TV is has its own atmosphere of like watching the news, watching YouTube.
Yes, and then that's transferred over into the work. It's you can't separate that.
You know how when you're in a restaurant and there's a TV in the background and you can't unsee or you can't look away, it's kind of distracting and
Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe if you were able to reframe the TV or something, or put a big frame around it so that you basically like letterbox it in the center to change the aspect ratio. Maybe that's a way of doing it, and then you kind of get people out of, oh, this is a TV. I mean, turning it vertically definitely helps, in that sense, to get you out of the, oh, this is a TV, but it still doesn't do it 100%. I just am more interested in like more interactive and more, I guess, digital work that melds in, is its own thing, like it's not necessarily just on a screen.
You went to the Art Blocks Marfa event?
Yeah.
Were there interesting presentations there as far as projection or different types of screens?
They did a really good job in the Art Blocks house of doing that, but it was mostly screens. It's just, like, what else are you going to do? Like, you can project it.
Did they sort of hide the cables into the wall?
Yes, they did a great job. They did a great job. And also the size, they size screens well. They curated that exhibition where they, in there well, like, they did a really good job. Like, and they had nice
other like the artist activations outside of the.
Yeah, so the artist activations were great too. Like, there was some, we one of the things that was cool was like DCA did like this pin thing where we all like a lot of the artists like made pins, and then people were, they got quarters and they put it in this machine. Then the proceeds went to kind of the Marfa library. We donated to it, and they got pins made by artists. And there was like some VR stuff that like Phil was doing, and that you could put on VR glasses, and you had this big sculpture that was virtual sculptures in the room. That was really cool. And there was a bunch of other artists that were doing different things, like Jimmy Herdberg was doing. I think he was doing like a the laser plotter thing.
Yeah.
Different. So it's definitely people. I think artists are interested in that and pushing it, but it's hard to do that stuff, and then it almost needs to be built to do it successfully. It needs to be built for a specific setting, right? You almost have to build it for. Yeah. Okay, this I want to do like you did for like an exhibition,
and then you go back to the gatekeepers.
Exactly. That's the thing, is that then you have to get in with the gatekeepers, and it's a whole different
interesting thing. The Rafik huge screen at MoMA. You probably saw it in person.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, amazing screen. I didn't know this, but now there's a different artist on that screen.
Yeah.
And it's a video art piece, and it doesn't have the same effect, and it doesn't have that crowd of attention. So it's funny, like you can have an amazing screen, but if it's not the right work for that screen, it's still not there. Yeah.
Exactly. I guess that's what I wish with digital art it will be more, which I guess that's what I wish I see more of, is custom screens, custom installations, like really thinking about beyond the work itself of the, like viewing that as part of the work, right? Not necessarily.
Well, there are artists who, in the traditional art world, who make moving images, but with a device, and so it's almost like a sculpture that you buy.
Yeah.
But that's more of a physical, narrow broadcast model. Like, oh, you have to see this in the exhibition space, in this setting, in this environment. Yeah. Yeah,
it's cool. Like, I just think that's like an avenue maybe for like creativity, at least that I'm interested in, for NFT artists, people that are releasing NFT, to think more about, okay, like how is this NFT displayed, right? Or the ways in which it's displayed, maybe. And also I think it's like, you can also have multiple versions. The physical version could be different than kind of maybe that natively digital version, right?
Yeah.